Hello and welcome. My name is Sanjay Soni. Here's a microlearning readiness video. So, Bob, I know you have written a book on this, right? SQL Server.
I have written a book on this, yes.
Awesome.
We got that resource at the very end. We'll show you how to get to that.
Great. So please tell us, what's so special about this topic?
You know, we did a pretty cool thing about 17 earlier, and you remember on some of those slides was platform of choice. Remember I kept telling you that, right? And again, you know, customers reached out to us and said, and partners like Red Hat, you see on the screen right here, Red Hat, SUSE Ubuntu, we're like, can't you do SQL on Linux? And we're like, sure, we think that's possible to do, although you're going to see some of the amazing technology that we use to power that. But again, we want to make sure you understand as we're focusing on Linux, the reason I've spent time focusing on Linux is that we're new to the market. You know, we've done SQL Windows for 20 plus years. Everybody knows how we run on SQL on Windows. But the message here is that we run on both. But today's second section here, this next section is about Linux, the specifics of how you use it, some of the differences. Here's the cool story about database compatibility we talked about earlier. Restore, backup, those kind of things. Is you're going to see that the overall theme is the functionality is the same, the configuration's slightly different. And that's required because we're running on a different operating system platform. You may be asking yourself, like, you know, so I said SQL 17, what is that, almost a year and a half we've done this? So we've learned a few things, you know, about SQL on Linux. And you can just see some numbers here. Docker pools, we'll talk about containers later. We can measure how many people have pulled our container image. But we also can record through telemetry how many instances and CPUs are using SQL Server on Linux. But we have some production customers. These are some names. These names you see right here are actual case studies that you can read on the internet of customers that have gone production on SQL on Linux. I get that question. Is anybody really going in production?
Yes.
We do. We have customers. And I'll just tell you, Sanjay, that the momentum is really big building. And it's building from a couple of places. We have customers that are trying to standardize on an OS we've found. They've come to us and said, you know, we're going to standardize on Windows or Linux, but in the interim, we have to run both. We're called a mixed shop. That's what they tell us. What do you mean by mixed shop? And they said, well, we need to run both Linux and Windows in our environment. Or we have customers that are reevaluating their preferred database platform for apps. They've got a new app they're building. They need a database technology. They're not sure what to do. Now that we have SQL on Linux, they're like, oh, maybe Oracle and Postgres aren't my only choices or MySQL. The SQL Server team's part of this group now. I'll reevaluate and see whether SQL Server can be an option for me. And then you just have this pure migration story. Customers from older versions of SQL are coming to us and saying Linux might be a preferred platform versus Windows in some cases. In some cases, it may be a new part of a company arm or a wing of a group of a company. Maybe they acquired a new company that's a Linux shop. And so they want to take these older versions of SQL and migrate it, which is great compatibility story, right? Or it's some of our competitors. They're literally just looking to replace what they have. You look at DV01 on there, that's kind of like our flagship customer that started from the very beginning with us. This is a customer using PostgreSQL and big Postgres shop. Postgres, Linux, that's all they wanted to do, but they weren't getting the performance they needed. The scalability wasn't there. And so they took a look at SQL Server, and they knew we only had it on Windows. And when they found out we did it on Linux, they actually contacted us and said, would you work with us? And now they run a production workload using SQL Server on Linux. It's pretty cool.
I see. So this whole concept of SQL Server on Linux, is it the same like as it runs on Windows?
The number one question I get, is it the same on Windows, right? I think you're going to find in the rest of today's talk that it is the same, but different. And again, what I mean by that is the features and functionality is going to be very familiar to you. The database compatibility is there. The app compatibility is there. But the config is going to be slightly different. That's because some of the configuration of SQL Server is dependent on the operating system. And so there's going to be some differences when you do things like configure security or availability. And you're going to see in a second a really cool demo how you deploy SQL in a new and exciting way. The next question I get is performance. Is performance the same on Windows, right? Yes, absolutely. The very first benchmark that we did, TPC-H, analytic workload, for SQL 17, the very first one out of the gate was on Linux, not on Windows. And that was because one of our vendors, our partners, said, we have Linux customers. We'd like to see how well this performs. And so we wanted to make sure people understood that the performance is the same. I think the best way to phrase this is the performance is similar. Workloads can vary a little bit, and you can configure your operating system just slightly different. But on comparable hardware, we have found so far from our customer base that performance is pretty much the same. And that should not be a reason for you to choose SQL on Windows or Linux. We, of course, just want you to choose SQL. So the choice on operating system is now your preferred operating system for your company. Licensing's the same. You buy a SQL Server license, it works on SQL Linux on Windows. And then, Sanjay, I get this one all the time. Do I need to know Linux?
Yes.
Do you ever get that question?
Yes, of course.
Okay, you guys did this Linux thing. You need to know it. And I think my answer over my experience now with this is that you need to know it just as well as you know Windows. So if you know how to use PowerShell in the command line, if you know how to add disks or do networking, yeah, you got to know those things in Linux. And I think the biggest thing that the average SQL DBA will notice, other than the tools just are the same, is the shell, using like a bash shell or something. And we'll show you demos of kind of what that looks like a little bit. So yeah, pretty cool stuff.
All right. So of course there's SQL Server on Windows, SQL Server on Linux. Are there more features in Windows than Linux?
Yeah, when I said it's the same, people are looking at me like, no, come on, there's got to be some difference on this thing. Again, I mentioned the config is the same. And I kind of throw this eye chart at them. I realize that's a pretty detailed chart to look at. But if you look at these little dots, they kind of represent the feature comparisons of SQL. Now we'll talk about the architecture and why the engine is literally the same bits. But if you look at the feature set, one of the things in SQL 17 we didn't get a chance to do is put in some features at what we call at the edge of the engine, like replication, distributed transaction processing, and machine learning services. But if you look at the blue dots, you'll find out in SQL 19 we're shoring that up. And considering, how could we potentially even move that back to SQL 17 at some point? And then poly-based being a popular feature, we've got that planned as well. So once SQL 19 comes out and it's fully baked, in fact, actually the SQL 19 preview already includes this. This thing is just the same. The feature set is the same thing you use. Maybe you'll find a little thing, that special feature that you wanted, a little tiny, small, minor thing that might be different. But customers tell me this all the time. We go look at it and we actually put it in there. It's our intention that features should not hold you up to decide on SQL on Windows versus Linux. No question.
That's great. And so let's talk about the architecture. What did SQL Server team do? And I know that you guys built it so soon. How did you do it?
Yeah, we came to market pretty quickly, didn't we? It's a pretty amazing story. If you look back in the 2010, 2011 timeframe, there was the Microsoft research team with a project called Drawbridge. And their goal was to abstract applications from the underlying operating system. I know that sounds crazy because if you're a developer, you're used to API calls, like Windows API or Linux curl APIs. So that was their goal to do that. They were mostly working with Windows systems. Our engineering team took a look at that technology, and they had a couple of choices. We could recompile the entire SQL Server on Linux, right, using compilers for Linux. We could change all our code to use Linux APIs. We would still be talking about Project Helsinki. That was our project name, by the way. We'd still be having that conversation about a project, right? But instead what we did is use that concept from the Drawbridge team to use this technology you see on the screen here called the SQL Platform Abstraction Layer, or PAL, SQL PAL. It's pretty interesting. It's a technology that allows the SQL Server binaries that were compiled for Windows to run under Linux unchanged and not really even know in a way that they're running on Linux, yet still make sure we interact with the Linux kernel. This is not emulation. Okay? This is not heavyweight. This is not a virtual machine. This is actual binary code running on SQL on Linux. And then the key other piece of software is this host extension. That's the one piece of code that's lightweight, that's compiled for Linux, that understands kernel calls like I/O, memory, CPU, and scheduling. But this even allows us to run things like SQL Agent, SQL Server SSIS, those kind of technologies also run on Linux because they use this technology. And here's the other thing that's really good for us. It's one code base. Slava Oaks, our lead engineering partner, when I was actually talking to him about this technology, I'm like, Slava, what's the best way to describe that this is the same? And he said, Bob, the query processor is the query processor. So the column store, the query processing code itself runs unchanged. It's one code base running on SQL Windows or SQL on Linux. And it's a pretty cool story, and it's why I can tell you that it's database compatibility. It's engine compatibility. When you think about what I showed you about REPL and DTC, those were some functionalities that were not, all that code was not in the core engine, so we had to actually make sure that ran well in this environment. So this is why I can just prove to you that Management Studio, your tools, your apps just run against the engine. Your T-SQL is the same.
All right. Can you please show us a live demo then?
Hey, why not, right? And when I show this demo, people that have not seen it just don't believe it. So.
And take your time.
Yeah, let's go through this for a second here. Sanjay, when I usually demo SQL Server on Linux, in many cases I actually use a secure shell terminal like MobaXterm or something. But I'm doing something a little bit new today that I've not shown before. So I don't know if you recognize this, but this is Azure Data Studio running on a Windows machine. And here's what I love about Azure Data Studio. So I've got 3 different panes to look at here. One is my workshops are all in these different markdown files and scripts. So I can look at a File Explorer window to see all of that. That's one thing I can do. The second is I've got a terminal down here in this window. I'm actually got a secured shelled terminal from Windows into a Red Hat Linux VM. So I'm doing everything inside Management Studio, inside Azure Data Studio, right? Everything here. In addition, you're going to find out I'm going to be able to connect to my SQL Server Linux deployment and then interact with it just like a SQL Server on Windows. So I got all three things going. I can build my scripts and I can look at my code. I can get a terminal to go see how that code's running on my Linux VM. And then I can interact with my databases just like a SQL Server normally. So I find that pretty cool. It's like a one-stop shop, for doing anything for SQL on Linux. So the first thing I'm going to do, and this is my README files that you can get for my workshops, which we'll talk about here. And the first thing I'm going to do is let me back up for a second and show you this. This is a command you're going to run. This is all in our documentation. This is a command you're going to run to decide which version of SQL Linux do I want to use and which distribution. And I know the syntax looks complex, but it's okay. You notice RHEL here. That means Red Hat Linux. So this is just a text file that I'll pull down, and this tells the SQL Server Installation Package Manager, which in this case we're adhering to what's called the Yum Package Manager for Red Hat. It tells it, like, which version of SQL should I put down? So let's go do this. And I'm going to use another technique in Azure Data Studio. I'm going to highlight this. I'm going to hit Control F8. This is going to automatically paste that command in my terminal window down there. So I'm going to go ahead and log in with my password. I'm going to kick off the install. Now, here it goes. Now, what is it doing? This is an online experience, but we support also an offline in case you're not connected to the internet. So what it's doing now, based on that text file, it's connecting to our servers where we store our packages, and it's going to download that package. You see it's about 200 meg in size. Once it downloads that package, it's going to go through the installation process. Does this look a little different than the Windows? You remember SQL on Windows, you go through this entire set of screens, and it's still a great installation experience, but it is a lot of different screens. And here's the big difference. When you install SQL for Windows, you not only deploy your software, you pick all your choices, right? Your features, all your config options, and so forth. For SQL Server on Linux, what we've done is slightly different. We believe in just deploying the bits for you. In this case, I'm just deploying the engine and agent together. And then what we do is for other features, those are in separate package files. So for example, if you're going to do SSIS, we're not installing that here. Where in Windows, you would normally do that. What we're doing here is we're installing just the engine and agent together, okay, the core engine. And I've also got the tools already pre-installed. That's a separate package. The new machine learning services, that's a separate package. So we've modularized the installation experience into packages, so it's faster to deploy these and pull them down. And then it just makes it quicker than you would do in a Windows scenario. And then I'm going to talk about, after our deployment a little bit here, on the configuration of SQL Server, because that's going to be slightly different as well. You're going to be able to configure the same features as you do on Windows, but you're going to do it in a slightly different way. So kind of a deploy, configure separation is one of the big things we're doing on SQL on Linux. It's pretty interesting. Now I'm done here, and it's really 2 steps. So I did the deployment where I pulled the bits down and it actually installed things. Now I'm going to run, this right here is a Python script, which we're going to talk about a little bit more after our deployment demo here. This Python script is used to finish the setup of SQL. Now, here's the cool thing if you're a Linux person watching this. You're like, hey, I want this to be all unattended. We fully embrace environment variables. I could actually use environment variables here and establish all my choices, and this is a completely unattended experience. You just click once and you just do the whole thing at one time. But do you see how quick it was to actually do that small part? That was like 2 minutes or something, right? So let me run this part here. You need to tell us the addition of SQL Server. I'll just pick Enterprise in this case. You need to agree to the EULA. And then you got to put in your SA password. Now, as I'm typing this, and I've done this before, many people have said, as I'm typing this, don't you support Active Directory? And the answer is yes, we do support Active Directory integration, but you still need to put in your SA password. So I'm doing that. SQL's finishing the configuration. In this particular case, I'm such a forward-looking guy. I'm installing the SQL 19 preview of SQL on Linux. And once it finishes this small configuration, it's done. That was it. I mean, people don't believe me. They're like, I don't believe you. I don't think you really did it. So let me prove to you that I did it.
Yeah, is it really installed?
Is it really installed? Yeah, I mean, come on, Bob, that seems like too fast. So you click over here on your exploration, and you see here, this is a name for my SQL on Linux server. And if I click here and connect, I'm now connected into the server. I could go hit Manage right here, bring it up, and this looks like SQL Server. But you notice here, it shows the fact that it's running Red Hat in Linux. This looks like running SQL on Windows. I mean, it's the same, right? Now, Sanjay, you're like, wait a minute though, you're a Management Studio guy. I'm like, I got you covered there.
I was looking for it.
Yeah, you were like, where is this Management Studio? So here, I'm running Management Studio, and I'm just connected to the same SQL Server on Linux. It's the same thing. So it's the same, right? If you come back to our window here, let's do a couple other things to kind of help you understand what we're doing. Let's restore a database. Remember I told you compatibility, right? So in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy my backup into the directory structure of SQL on Linux. So I'll first run that one. In fact, I'll show you what that looks like. Remember, I've got my little code editor for all my scripts. This is what it's going to do. It's just going to copy in the backup, and then I'm going to make sure that the permissions are correct for the backup for SQL to restore it. Let's copy it in. Now, the other thing I want to do is I want to restore the backup. Let's look at that code. And why is it the same? Well, here's the SQL command line tools. So we're going to talk a little bit as well, but our command line tools are natively compiled for Linux, Mac, and Windows. So SQL command, which you've used before, it looks the same. And here's kind of the SQL script. Maybe that looks familiar to you, restore database.
Yes, of course.
But what you're not used to is this part, the naming convention. This is where it gets a little different for folks who are on Windows or Linux. So you lean to the right a little bit with your slashes here. And this is installing the SQL Server database into those directories. So let's go kick that off. And I'm running it. So I'm just running SQL command to do a restore. And when I'm done, I expect to see that database, which is wide role importers, the sample we're doing. Now behind the scenes, what are we doing? We're just running the same engine code. We're just restoring your backup. And that backup was actually copied from a Windows server that I have, right? And then in this particular case, it's an older version of a backup, so let's do some small upgrade steps. But this is the same restore code, Sanjay, that you've seen, because again, the engine bits are the same. And so I now can go forth when this is fully restored and just do whatever I want with this database. Wow. Kind of crazy, right?
That's awesome.
So that's the story. And so if I go back over here to my exploration window, should take another minute here to finish. I expect to be able to refresh this, and then what I'm going to see is in fact, you can see it's in the middle of restoring.
Restore.
Yeah, I'm restoring wide role importers in the process here. So when that's going to finish, let's spend a little bit of time, showing you a few Linux things. Have you used Linux before, Sanjay?
Not really.
Ever? No? Linux?
No.
Never? Okay. Don't be afraid.
Okay.
Don't be scared. Okay.
Because I'm afraid.
You're afraid. Let me show you a few commands that you might find interesting, right? So first of all, you've used SQL before. You want to see what the error log file.
Yes.
Is that something you want to see?
Yes.
Okay, great. No problem. We got you covered there. So this is where we put the error log. Now I'm going to switch over here because there's permissions on these files. There's the directory where we're going to put it, and maybe you recognize that. There you go. There's your error log file, which you can scroll to. It looks just like your SQL error log file. So now you feel more comfortable. Like, great, I know where the error log file is. I feel better.
It's not alien to me.
It's okay. Now the next thing you may want to do is what are all the processes running? You ever seen like Task Manager or Task List on Windows? So you can run a command like this, AXF, something like that. This is going to show you all the different processes, and here is the SQL Server process you can see right here. Here's SQL running here. So I can show you that as well. So that's no problem. Now the other thing you might want to do is show me CPU percentage. Is that something you might want to see?
Of course.
It's called top. Just easily shows you a live refresh view. In fact, let's make this bigger so you can see that. This is just showing you, and it'll kind of refresh itself, showing what's going on in your server. Okay, now you feel a little bit more comfortable. I personally love something called HTOP. So let's run that guy. Ooh, that's kind of pretty, isn't it? Well, look up here. This is kind of like live CPU utilization updates going on. So when I show SQL Server demos of SQL CPU utilization and how we can push processors, I always use this HTOP type demo. So those are some tools, and you'll find all sorts of tools out there. My workshops have examples of how to look at disks, and I'll just show you that one. Disks. We got to see disks, right? There's your disks. There's the disks in the system with the file systems they're mounted to. So don't be afraid, Sanjay. You're very capable of going through SQL Server on Linux. So let's go back here and see if this finished.
Yes.
And it did. So now I can see, let's go back to this part. There's my let's see, let's refresh that. There's wide role importers. I can go in here, I can click here, I can go to a table, I can select the top 1,000, and I'm ready to go. Just like that. In fact, we'll pull it down so you can see it. Yeah, there you go, there's your results. Looks similar, right? So one other thing I wanted to show is this, and I love some of the new tool innovations that we're doing. So you saw SQL command, we talked about that, right? But one of the things about SQL command, there's two things that bother me about SQL command. I love IntelliSense. inside SQL Server. So we have IntelliSense and Management Studio. The other thing I hate about SQL Command, and by the way, it's still a great tool, is the wrapping. Like I got a bunch of columns, and I can't see how it lines up with my column headers. So here comes in this new tool called MS SQL CLI, open source, mind you. So is Azure Data Studio, open source and cross-platform. This is based on Python, so it works across Windows, Mac, and Linux. So let me run this, put in my SA password, and we're off and running. So I'm connected to SQL Server. Now you're saying, okay, what about this IntelliSense? So watch this. Use wide, whoa, look at that.
Cool.
Picks up my databases, so I do that. Now I want to go to just sys objects, so I get that full IntelliSense experience. Now look what you do. It detects whether your columns are too much to wrap around your screen. It puts it in this vertical record format. Yeah. I love this. I mean, this is a future of a tool we're working on. And again, it's the same experience running this. And I'm actually doing this in the Linux VM, but I could have done this on my Windows laptop, remotely connected if I wanted to my Linux server if I wanted to. So there's your basic deploy and explore experience. Do you feel scared now? Or
No, I feel more comfortable now.
But you see some new innovation we're doing, like these command line tools, Azure Data Studio. If you look at this environment, again, I did everything from this console. I did everything I needed to do from here. And so I kind of like the fact that I'm building my scripts, I'm connected to my database, running queries, and I'm running a secured shell terminal using what's called the bash shell against SQL Server on Linux.
I see. So here's a live question for you, right?
A live question. Oh, well, you didn't tell me I get live questions.
So what about perfmon?
What about perfmon? So it's fair to ask that question. The perfmon graphical tool itself, that actually requires some Windows services to see the graphics. But here's the good news for you. All of the SQL counters are based on dynamic management views. So you therefore could query all your SQL counters by just querying our DMVs. And the other thing that's pretty neat is that I've got demos in my workshops you can do where you can use Azure Data Studio to query. This is my friend Pedro Lopes built this for me. You can query the DMV counters into a table, and you can see a chart, almost like you see it in perfmon, all inside Azure Data Studio. So you get some of those capabilities.
Fantastic. I know Pedro is helping us with live Q&A as well today. So thank you so much for
That's a pretty cool system, right? Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay.
Great. Thank you for watching this video. Learn more about this and other topics at azure.com/SQLDW.